Welcome to Mental Health and You. This podcast brings you the best information and advice from across the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust. Every fortnight, we will hear from one of our specialist areas, be it school and parent support, the Recovery College, wellbeing, or research.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's podcast with the Recovery College. Today, I have with me Mark, who's a peer tutor at the Recovery College, and we're going to perhaps chat about his journey, particularly on the How to Tell Your Story course. And also, my name is Danny, and I'm one of the locality leads in the Recovery College. So welcome, Mark, and thanks for coming along.
Hi, how you doing?
Very good, very good. Yourself?
Yeah, not bad, thanks.
Good. So I thought we'd just have a sort of chat about your journey on the course and sort of go from there. So perhaps in the beginning, how did you sort of hear about the course?
Well, it was a time when I got really unwell and I was in services, and I had a good care coordinator who sort of recommended coming along to it generally. So I kind of came in not really knowing. And as I was taking some of the courses, lots of people were saying the How to Tell Your Story course was really good and really interesting. And yeah, I come from a creative background, so I found it interesting to maybe work out or try and see what my story was like. So when I came to do the course, I'd done a bunch of the smaller ones already, and I think I'd done ACT as well at that point. But yeah, I heard about it kind of just through the grapevine of doing other courses.
And do you think that perhaps doing the other courses first helped with this course? Because arguably it's perhaps a course that people might want to choose later on.
Yeah, and it was kind of mentioned that as well. It was mentioned as one of the ones that was a bit more sort of thought-provoking and maybe a bit more to to digest. So yeah, I'd done some of the one-day ones, and I'd done some of the sort of shorter ones already. I think by the time I got to ACT, that was kind of the sort of level of being able to engage with it. So I did it quite soon after that. But there was lots of things that I'd picked up from the course that kind of came through. And now, obviously, doing the course, I see that more than ever, really.
Definitely. And sorry, you've mentioned ACT a couple of times. Are you happy perhaps just to explain a little bit more, perhaps for people that don't know what ACT is?
Oh, yeah. I think it's called acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's kind of, I guess, in a loose way, I found it that whereas, say, with like CBT, there might be a sort of an aim to try and alleviate the symptoms or to try and sort of, neutralize them or something. ACT was something about sort of like accepting it and living on with it. And, I have something like quite a lot of people, I have a chemical balance I was born with. So I'm not gonna, the ACT course really kind of resonated with me because it kind of was something I could start to use. I think that was one of the times in Recovery College where I really kind of started to go and implement things that sort of helped me. And I think being at that point kind of was useful to go to tell how you tell your story with sort of those kind of a few things I'd learned already kind of under my belt kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That all makes perfect sense, and I think they're two good courses, perhaps that like sort of relate to each other a lot in some ways, anyway. So I suppose the first time you went on How to Tell Your Story, or in fact, perhaps even the first time you went to Recovery College, did you have kind of many expectations around kind of how it might be?
I mean, initially on turning up, I was really just an open book of like, well, I'm just going to give it a go and see what it actually is about. By the time I got to How to Tell Your Story, though, I kind of did have some ideas of what I might want to get out of it or might want to sort of understand. And one of those was trying to sort of take on like, okay, what is my story going to be? Like, what is it? It's, and sort of seeing if the course would sort of bring that out of me, or it would sort of let me, I don't know, develop it or something. But that's the sort of thing I imagined might be going on when I sort of went into it. But equally, I was also a little bit sort of confused, not confused, but I was a little kind of unknown. There was an unknown element to it.
Yeah,
as well.
which I think is understandable, kind of the title, how to tell your story, that does leave it somewhat sort of open to interpretation. And then, how did you find then sort of the first time around going on the course? And
Well, I think I now know that that's sort of in place. I did find some of the bits, it started off very light, but it also went really into sort of quite challenging territories. Like there was bits I had to really kind of wrap my head around, and I had to sort of take away and think about, the bit about a recovery story and what that might be, and about sort of the bits about kind of, the bits in the sort of third week about the sort of the language and the sort of recovery language and adopting that. Those were quite unexpected, and I think even up to the actual final thing, I had this kind of feeling of, well, where do I start? What do I begin with? Where do I go with this? And those were sort of unexpected challenges, but also at the sort of same time of that, feeling indecisive about how I'm going to tell it, there was a bit about sort of showing various creative ways of doing it, so that kind of helped me a bit. But yeah, it was there was stuff that was actually kind of challenging, and I had to kind of think about how I relate to that, and do I relate to that.
Yeah, okay, and I think that makes a lot of sense in that, like you said, parts of it, I suppose, arguably are challenging, and therefore that's why it's sort of recommended, isn't it, that it perhaps comes sort of later in people's recovery journey. But also it sounds very much like you kind of resonated well with the creative bit being in the beginning. That's kind of perhaps why you chose the course, because you are quite a creative person, aren't you? And that allowed you that kind of way to express your story, would you say? Or
yeah, I think so, because I'd sort of tried to do it in writing, or I tried sort of practicing doing it in writing, and I found that very sort of difficult to do because it wasn't natural for me. But I think I remember almost when that fourth week came, I'd changed from this bit of writing to doing something that was based on something visual, and that kind of gave me like a way to tell it in a certain time frame, and it gave me a way to sort of like put actual sections of my story next to each other. And though it wasn't sort of like a polished article, it was definitely, and it was also not what I would have expected either. I wasn't sure whether I'd going to be there for sort of 40 minutes starting off in the 80s. Yeah, it was a challenge, that sort of something I really sort of learnt from, though, I think.
And in terms of the first time you went on a course and you sharing your story, how did that feel, particularly the first time around, at the end of it, kind of sharing your story with the group?
Well, I think that first time round, I was almost looking around to be like, did I do it right? Did I get that right? And I thought, okay, well, this is something to sort of work on and think about, because everyone on that last week, everyone sort of who wants to shares, I actually then got quite a bit of inspiration from other people. Like after I'd done mine, I was like, oh, there's lots of different ways, and I started thinking about like redoing my story, but also incorporating some of the other things, like the bits about privacy and about catering your story to help you with different things. That was something that I sort of went away from the course with, going, oh, I'm going to work on that. But yeah, the final thing that I did, even though I felt a bit nervous about, like, is this the right thing? The tutors were very much kind of echoing, like, there's no perfect answer here. There's no final product. This is the beginnings of things, and that reassurance really helped as well.
Brilliant. No, I often find that that on a course, as you said, it is often considered the first draft. Really, it doesn't have to be by any means a polished version, does it? It's very much about, first of all, thinking and formulating your story, and that's kind of the start of it. really, isn't it? And hopefully the course perhaps gives people more tools to be able to develop their story sort of after the course as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, something that I did and I've seen other people do was I sort of waited a little while and signed up again on a different term and sort of went through it again. Definitely the second time, sort of stuff that I'd remembered from before that worked, I was able to recognize. And then some of the stuff that I was really sort of thinking about and challenging, I got to kind of like figure that out a bit more. And and I think when I did my story that time, it was a completely different thing that I did. So yeah, you could see a sort of change development. And I think there's something in that sort of with the course of it. The first time you do it, it's almost setting you up to try and do it again and again if you want, or to try and sort of work on it as you will.
Yeah. I mean, because I suppose in reality it's only kind of 4 weeks, isn't it? So it is only really sort of an introductory to thinking about your story. Earlier on, you kind of mentioned a recovery story. I mean, how would you perhaps differentiate sort of telling your story to perhaps how to tell your recovery story?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a real time with that because the sort of more clinical idea or the clinical kind of definition of recovery is to be cured of something, for it to be gone at the end. And of course, anyone like me who has got a lifelong thing that we're not going to get rid of, that word recovery felt a little bit distant and a little bit like, well, how do I relate to that? And I had to kind of just sort of think about like how I would sort of consider something within my mental health journey as a something that word would apply with. And I remember it was the bit that kind of made me go, okay, was realizing that there was a time many years ago where my health just naturally changed, and I started having these horrible episodes every day, like really, really intense for long periods of time, for months really. But eventually with like help from doctors and specialists and like helping with certain aspects of say sleep and stuff, and also like medication changes, I came out of it, and that really hasn't happened since. But I've had all my other things that I have to live with my condition. They didn't go away. At the end of it, I was still dealing with the basics that I always deal with, but I couldn't deny that I'd gone from somewhere much worse to somewhere much better in my mental health.
Yeah.
And that I did recover from that, or I guess it was, and I kind of thought, well, okay, well, you can have something. It's you can have something and find a way of living well with it, and to living with it, and also to sort of like see that there are times sort of where that idea of recovery comes into play. And I think I always say now on the course, I sort of think of it as just going from a worse place in your mental health to a better place in your mental health, and that being a story of you recovering from something that you went through. It doesn't have to be that the end that you are completely alleviated of everything, because for a lot of people that's not the same reality. But I found my relationship with I found my kind of take on the word recovery made sense when I thought about that story, and that sort of also helped me to realize that it kind of may exist in certain times as well.
And how did it then feel going from the sort of transition to being a student on the course, and then obviously going to then sort of tutor on the course, and the change of roles?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, it was something I'd never really sort of done before. It was quite out of my sort of experience. I remember thinking, because I think I ended up taking the course like three times maybe, and I think I then went and like sort of sat in on a couple as well. So I really tried to take in as many of the things as I could and observe what other people did and how they interacted with it. but I sort of thought, I sort of thought, well, I can represent the things that I have to do, live with, like, lifelong mental health condition, or experiences with that. And also I thought I could bring the things that I found difficult to get my head around, that I needed some time to actually work on. I can kind of maybe help people on the course who are in that same boat of me, of going like, well, how does this, and I can maybe go, well, I had that feeling as well, and this, this is just what I came to a conclusion of, but this is, if it helps, this is what I did.
I think what you're right, and that's obviously sort of the role of the peer tutor, isn't it? To be able to share that relevant lived experience to perhaps sort of bridge that gap with other students who are in the course, and you might, like you say, perhaps I suppose I always say no one can say they've been in the exact same place, but you might have been in similar places, and therefore have relevant sort of experience, and you can perhaps share with other people how you felt and how the way that you went about things, and hopefully that gives other people hope and inspiration as well.
I also had taken down the things that I really responded to from tutors when I went, and like made sure that I made sure I sort of got involved in that as well. Like I think just down to little things, like when the tutors came in, I always really liked that there was tea and coffee, and occasionally even a biscuit. And so when people came in, I was always just really enthusiastic to go, it's hot drink, help yourself. And I just remember the things that kind of like made me comfortable that they did, I tried to do them as well, so I could hopefully make people coming feel, because even though it is a course that we kind of recommend towards the end, some people do go in quite early on them sometimes, and that they can still be quite intimidated if they come in. I mean, I'd done a few when I was still intimidated when I came in. So yeah, I try and remember what the tutors did that made me feel a bit more comfortable, and I tried to apply that when we were doing it.
That's
but
really
it was
good.
it was really good to sort of like have all the, I mean, it was really good to sort of have all the people interacting, and really sort of like learning as well, because there's a whole element of that with the the amount of interaction that happens between us and the people attending. We all kind of learn from each other, even though there is a kind of course. There's always things that people have done that they talked about that are really kind of inspiring or interesting, or there's like sort of skills and things that people recommend, and insight and things like that. And I started to sort of get that as well, which was really nice.
Brilliant. Absolutely. And like you said, I think also sort of been on it sort of 3 times as a student yourself, but then obviously sort of tutoring, but still going to other How to Tell Your Story courses as well, was really, really, really good for your own development, because it gave you such a well-rounded sort of experience of it. That certainly, in my honest opinion, translates to when you co-deliver it, that you can obviously really see that you've been on it lots and lots of times, and obviously you've got lots to offer when you do teach the course. I suppose I was just going to ask you as well, we've kind of gone into it a little bit already, but in terms of what would you say perhaps are the benefits or the potential benefits for people sort of going on the How to Tell Your Story course?
Something that has been brought up by people on the course before, but is definitely something that that I benefited from and had trouble with, was the element of sharing. Like I have a long history of oversharing, and I've definitely met other people who we all have the same problem of our just needing to sort of share that much. And I think the course kind of starts to give you ideas about ways you can not do that, or ways you can do that to a level that you're comfortable with, and that you can, and I think that for me sort of was a really, really big kind of changer, because it meant that I could interact with people in a more comfortable way, or I could sort of, certain things that I might worry about, I don't have to do as much, and that was really beneficial. And I think one of the in the sort of similar area of of that part of the course. We talk about having like different versions of our story for different reasons.
Right.
And I think we sort of like usually use the example of like a doctor or a kid, like you tell the same story very differently.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
and I've had to actually go and get some help from services, and I was able to interact with it. I was able to like cater my story to exactly what I want from a medical professional, and just be able to like kind of like hone in on the care that I needed. And I wouldn't ever been sort of able to conceive of, there's a version of my story that I can work out that I can just make really efficient. And I don't think I would have had that. And I think some people do take that as away, and it's a big skill to have.
Yeah.
And I think also just people like, I think, there's a lot of, and I had this as well, there's a lot of sort of reflection that goes on with, sort of what, figuring out your story. And sometimes that process itself, like, though it can be challenging, it can be sort of like quite a sort of an emotional part of the course for some people. I think being able to sort of safely start to tell that story to themselves, those things can be sort of very sort of personally beneficial, I think.
And in fact, I think that's a good point, because we often recommend in a course, don't we, that perhaps before people look to share their story publicly, or even sometimes with the group, that actually usually anyway the best place to start is to sort of perhaps be able to tell it to yourself in a way which you're happy with, and particularly, like you said, picking up on things like privacy. So because I think that was a really good example you gave, in that you wouldn't, for example, sort of perhaps have the same conversation with your therapist as you would with perhaps your neighbour, or someone you went to school with, who you perhaps bumped into and you haven't seen for 20 years. The sort of different versions would perhaps be very different, wouldn't they, about perhaps your own kind of life or kind of mental health.
Yeah, and I think the course sort of shows you that you can tell your story in a variety of ways. It's not a strict sort of structure, that you can sort of, if you want to, you can leave things out and still be true to saying what goes on. But you can sort of, I think the course sort of introduces the idea of those variables of, like, you might want to keep names secret, or you might want to keep certain names or diagnosis, or things that you might find sensitive. It sort of introduces the idea that you can tell your story, and keep the things that you want safe for you, and still be kind of true to telling the story for yourself, and not feel like you're sort of keeping back things and being sneaky. I think it introduces the fact that those things can be a really sort of positive tool, and can sort of help you sort of feel more comfortable about telling people or telling anyone your story.
Definitely, thank you, Mark. And I was just going to ask you kind of one last question as well. So I know you've mentioned, and I've obviously seen on the course as well, that your story's kind of developed and changed over time, hasn't it? And with the latest one being kind of very visual, which I think is brilliant. So in the future, what do you think you might do differently, or kind of next to adapt your own story to share? Because I know you've mentioned before that you're thinking of changing it a little bit.
Yeah, I always sort of consider changing or developing, or I mean, it had gone from, I think the first time I ever did it, I based it on the tattoos, and I told the story about my mental health at the time of getting each one. And then I think I used I wrote a very practical one that was written, which I think delivered with you to certain sort of people involved in Recovery College. And then over time, I think, I slowly made video art, and that sort of made my story with that. And I think I've changed it a few times, and I've added different bits of noise, and I tried to edit a little bit. But I think the next one, I think there's always a sort of feeling of well, there's so much, there's so many sort of like versions and stories and bits, like, would I want to tell? And I've thought about like like, what if I went and did a video based on a different story, like a different version of my story? Because doing the course, I've sort of told maybe like, what is it, like 4 or 5 different sort of different sort of segments of my story for different sort of purposes. And I've thought about like doing maybe more art or more kind of video stuff that was related to some of those.
Yeah.
I think that's so. I think it's sort of there's a sort of a development that goes on all the time when you're sort of thinking about your own story, because it's like there's for some of us like me, it's goes back so long. It's like, well, what bits do I want to do? What bits do I want to sort of include? And I think it's a sort of ever slightly developing thing.
Absolutely, and also I quite like what you said in that there isn't really one format, is there? So however people like to express themselves, that's pretty much always an option, isn't it? In terms of written word or poetry, photographs, music. There's been lots of ways that people have done that, isn't there?
Yeah, that's been sort of the benefit of doing the course, is seeing over and over all these different ways that people approach it, and from everything from very first person account right up to PowerPoint presentations and music and cartoons and poetry and people just bringing in a bit of music, and just this huge variety of things that kind of go right the way through from the sort of, traditional written first person through to all sorts of different creative things. Really, it's been sort of treat, because I think I get to do so many of the courses that I get to see all these different ones each time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming along today and sort of talking to us about how to tell your story in Recovery College, Mark. Okay, then we'll leave it there. Thank you, Mark, and thanks a lot, everyone. And we'll see you next time. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please do subscribe. It's free and means the podcast will automatically download every fortnight. Do rate and review Mental Health and You, and follow our social media accounts. They're all in the show notes. And more than anything, look after yourself.